All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are here with a screencast talking about the people of the West. Now, some of this will be review, some of it will be brand new information, but I wanted to create this screencast that way you are ready not only for our first test, but as you go through your hyperdoc, which you should have some of these people already done. But if you don't, this will help you kind of clarify the information that you have. So as I go through this, make sure you're filling out your chart that you have. It'll go over these people, but it's a good way for you to get out the main points of this video. That way you have all your information to study in either your hyperdoc or this chart, for example. So just a quick review. Transcontinental Railroad. Remember, this opened up the West. This really stretched from coast to coast, but it was a way for goods, information, and people to get out to the West Coast and start settling. Remember the interaction they had with Native Americans, which we'll talk about here in a second. The Homestead Act, remember that sent people west. They gave them 160 acres if they lived there for 5 years, built a dwelling, which was often called a soddy, so remember that. And then Manifest Destiny, this is the belief that it is our, meaning the American, God-given right to expand coast to coast, and as we go through this entire course, this word manifest destiny will have several different meanings. So make sure you keep that tucked away in your brain, and we will use that word a lot. So Native Americans. These people were the most heavily impacted of all the people. Now, if you take a look, these are Native Americans dressed in American clothing. It's a part of this assimilation. So Congress was scared of these Native Americans. Many early pictures, many early paintings of Native Americans by the settlers made Native Americans look like savages. Anytime Congress or the average person back east talked about Native Americans, they often referred to them as beasts and savages. But with the Dawes Act in 1887, Congress wanted to assimilate Native Americans, basically make them become part of our culture, and gave each Native American head of household 160 acres of reservation land for farming. Now, when it says reservation land for farming, we're not talking about great land here. We're giving them the land that we don't really want, land that can't be farmed, places where there's no water really. So we're not giving them great land and everything's fine and dandy. No, we're giving them pretty bad land. And then leftover land was sold to American settlers, and proceeds would go to a trust for Native Americans. Now, this, you see this poster here, Indian land for sale, fine lands in the West. This poster is something that everybody would have seen back east, especially because of the fine land. So if you're just an average person walking down the street and you see, oh, hey, Indian land for sale, it's already irrigated, there's grazing, there's agriculture, there's dry farming, let's just pick up and go west. So you would see these a lot out in the eastern part of the United States, bigger cities trying to convince people that going west may not be the worst idea they could have. So Indian Wars, we will talk about this a little bit more, but again, this isn't something that I'm going to really require you to know too much about, the wars or battles specifically, but as settlers went west, obviously they went into Native American territory, which led to some conflict, and as these battles raged on, the Native Americans would participate in the ghost dance. So this was a dance that the Native Americans believed would bring back the buffalo, bring back their ancestors, and basically kick the white people off of their land. So the ghost dance absolutely scared the white settlers. I mean, imagine traveling in this land you don't know, you see a fire out in the distance, and you see Native Americans dancing like this. So it was a big culture shock. It was definitely scary for the white settlers. And again, that led to a lot of the hardships that the Native Americans faced. Wounded Knee, United States Army rounded up 350 Sioux, attacked them, wiped them out. This was the last major battle of the Indian Wars. There were a lot of other wars, like the Sand Creek Massacre, where the United States Army killed women and children who were Native American that were unarmed. Now, the settlers did face hardships as well, but definitely nothing like the Native Americans faced. So we'll talk more about the settlers and specific groups here in a second. Make sure you know the ghost dance, and make sure you know Wounded Knee was the last major battle. So you might want to write that somewhere on your chart or highlight that. That way you are set for our test. Now, the Mormons. This is something that a lot of people don't know about Western migration and people settling out west. So the Mormons moved west to escape religious persecution. They had some beliefs that aren't part of their religion today, so don't think I'm talking about today. But they had some religious beliefs that were not seen as favorable by people back east, and they were discriminated against because of some of the practices that the Mormon faith used to practice. Again, this is not today. This is way back in the late 1800s, but they moved west to escape religious persecution. Now, they started to head west because of Joseph Smith, but Brigham Young is the guy who got them to Utah. They settled in Salt Lake City. They faced less discrimination, and as their religious beliefs started to evolve into what we know today, obviously it's more acceptable, and some of you may know Mormons, or you may be Mormon yourself. So they're big out in Utah. If you ever heard of the college, Brigham Young University, BYU, that comes from this, when they settled in Salt Lake City. So the Mormons played a big role in settling another state and making a state viable and building a really stronghold there. And obviously, Utah is a thriving state today. So, immigrants. This is something that you absolutely have to know. These Irish and Chinese immigrants do not get enough credit for what they did in the West. If it was not for these Chinese and Irish immigrants, we would not have gotten the Transcontinental Railroad built. They were the ones working the 14, 15, 16-hour days with low pay. They were the ones doing the dynamite blasts. They were laying the railroads out in the sun, doing all the heavy lifting. Like I said, these guys were the ones who did all the hard work. And they were probably the most discriminated against of all the people out in the West because, again, you know how it is. Americans were blaming the immigrants for taking their jobs. Now, there's an argument to be made that a lot of Americans didn't want to do these dangerous jobs because, well, they were dangerous. But this led to a very, very, very tough time for Irish and Chinese immigrants. They were disrespected, and all they were trying to do was move to the United States to send money back, whether it was in China or Ireland. They were really trying to send money back home. We're trying to bring their families to the United States, and obviously that wasn't a cheap task. So this was a way for them to make money and achieve their American dream. We'll talk more about the Chinese and the Chinese immigration quota. We'll talk about that in the next unit, but just keep in mind that this was really one of the first times that a large group of immigrants were discriminated against when they actually played a very, very vital role in laying the Transcontinental Railroad. Exodusters. These are some of my favorite people because this was a time where the freed slaves were either sharecroppers or still worked on the land of their former slave owners because they didn't really have anywhere else to go. But they actually picked up, moved west for financial and racial freedom. Yes, they could participate in the Homestead Act. Their leader was Pap Singleton, and they settled in Kansas. So again, this is a picture of some of the Exodusters. I know it's kind of a weird name. It doesn't really fit them very much, but keep in mind that these were very, very brave men and women. They band together and were willing to really risk it all and head west. That way they could start a brand new life. Farmers. So these guys and girls had a constant struggle with railroad owners due to shipping prices. So if I'm a railroad owner and John wanted to ship something and Steve wanted to ship something and Steve made me mad last week, well, I can charge him 3 or 4 times what I charge John, and I'll give John a break because he's always been really nice to me. So there's no regulation at the time, and these railroad owners were just charging whatever they want. So in response, the farmers created the Grange. This was a kind of a political party / labor union, and it was formed by these farmers to give them equal rights. And then technology came along and helped the farmers. Now, when I say help, it helped them farm easier, but it really put them in a hard spot because it created a surplus. They were farming way more efficiently, producing more goods at a rapid pace, and they couldn't sell as much as they produced. So it created a surplus. That dropped the price. That's economics. When you have a surplus and demand can't meet the amount of supply or the amount of goods you have, then you got to sell them cheaper, and hopefully people buy them up. And then poor farming techniques caused the land to lose all of its nutrients, which led to the Morrill Land Grant Act. This gave land to colleges and universities who are focused on improving agricultural techniques. What that means is the government gave huge plots of land to universities or colleges that wanted to teach people how to farm. And an example of that be NC State. And then my alma mater, Penn State, which is a big-time agricultural school. So that is the screencast. That is all I have for you. Hopefully you filled out your chart. Please go back to your HyperDoc and double check with this and make sure you have the correct information. This is just a little snippet of what you need to have, but I wanted you to have a place you go back and reference, because I guarantee when that final exam comes out in December, you will see some of these people, especially the grain. That's a popular question. So keep that in mind, and I'll leave this up on our Google Classroom so you can check it time and time again, and that way it won't go anywhere.